She didn't think. That was the part nobody ever understood afterward. There was no decision, no calculation, no brave moment where she weighed her life against a stranger's. Her body just moved. At 8:47 on a Thursday evening, the kind of cold that makes Chicago feel personal had settled over the Millbrook district. Inside Cassini's, the private dining room on the second floor was filled with the kind of quiet that costs money. Low candlelight, linen napkins folded into swans, a string quartet playing something European that nobody was really listening to. The restaurant seated 40 on a good night. Tonight, it seated 11, by reservation only. By invitation, really. Lily Marsh had worked the second floor for 3 years. She knew every booth, every temperamental light switch, every server trick for carrying 4 plates without a tray. She was 22, and she was saving for nursing school, and she had a brother named Tyler who was 16, and had a way of leaving his cereal bowl in the sink every single morning that drove her absolutely insane. And she was thinking about that bowl, actually, as she pushed through the kitchen door at 8:47 and stepped back into the dining room. That was when the man in the gray coat came through the window. Not the door, the window. He came through the glass with the kind of violence that erases sound. One moment, the night was outside where it belonged, and the next it was inside, and he was inside with it. And he had already up before the first piece of glass had finished falling. There were 2 of them. The second one came through the door. Nobody moved. That's the thing about real violence. It doesn't announce itself the way movies pretend it does. There's no slow motion. There's no music. There's just a sudden terrible stillness where every person in the room becomes a photograph of themselves. Lily was standing 6 feet from the corner booth. She saw the man in the gray coat raise his gun. She saw where he was pointing it. The woman in the corner booth was 71 years old. Her name was Greta Fontaine, and she had silver hair pinned back with a clip that looked like a dragonfly. And she was wearing a navy blue dress because it was her son's birthday dinner, and she had just been laughing at something the man across from her had said when the window came apart. Lily moved. She didn't decide. She crossed 6 feet of hardwood floor and put herself between the gun and the old woman, and the man fired twice, and both bullets found her instead. The third shot hit the wall. The fourth grazed her arm as she was already falling. She didn't feel it right away. People always want to know that, and the answer is no, not right away. What she felt was the floor coming up and the sound of the room coming back, all of it at once. Screaming, chairs scraping, someone shouting in a language she didn't recognize, and then a pair of hands, large and cold and urgent, pressing against her side. "Stay with me." A man's voice close to her ear. "Do not close your eyes. Look at me." She looked. The man kneeling over her was not someone she had seen before, though she would learn later that he had been at that dinner. He had been in the hallway when the shooting started. He had moved faster than anyone else in the room, including his own security, and he had reached her before any of them had thought to. His name was Julian Fontaine. He was 41 years old. He ran the most powerful organized crime family east of the Mississippi, and he had just watched a 22-year-old waitress take 2 bullets for his mother. "You're going to be fine," he said, and his voice did not shake, but his hands did. The surgeon who worked on Lily Marsh that night said afterward that 3 centimeters to the left and the first bullet would have ended everything. As it was, it tore through the right side of her abdomen, nicked a vessel, and required 4 hours in the OR and a blood transfusion, and 17 days in the hospital. The second bullet had lodged between 2 ribs. They removed it on the table. She was unconscious for most of the first 2 days. When she woke up the first time, it was dark outside the window, and there was a man she didn't recognize sitting in the chair beside her bed. Not Julian Fontaine. A younger man, maybe mid-30s, with tired eyes and a coffee cup balanced on his knee. "Where am I?" she said, or tried to. It came out closer to a sound than a sentence. "St. Michael's," the man said. "Private floor, you're okay." She went back to sleep. The second time she woke up, it was morning, and the chair was occupied by someone different. A woman this time, 60s, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was doing a crossword puzzle in pen. Lily watched her for a long moment. "You're not a nurse," Lily said. The woman looked up. She took off her reading glasses and folded them, and she looked at Lily with the kind of attention that made Lily feel like she was being read, not just seen. "No," the woman said. "I'm not." She paused. "My name is Greta." The silence that followed was long enough for both of them to understand it. "How are you feeling?" Greta Fontaine asked, and her voice was careful in the way people's voices get when they are carrying something heavy and trying not to drop it. "Like I got shot," Lily said. Greta made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Yes, I imagine so." She reached forward and straightened the blanket at the foot of Lily's bed, a small, unnecessary gesture, the kind mothers make when they don't know what to do with their hands. "You didn't have to do what you did," Greta said quietly. Lily thought about that. "I know," she said finally. "Why did you?" Lily looked at the window. The Chicago sky outside was the color of old pewter, flat and enormous. She thought about the answer for a real moment, not a polite one. "You were laughing," she said, "right before. You were laughing at something and I didn't want that to stop." Greta Fontaine sat very still for a moment. Then she nodded once, slowly, the way people nod when something has landed in exactly the right place. She picked up her crossword and didn't say anything else. But she stayed. Julian Fontaine came on the 4th day. Lily had been moved off the critical list by then, and the room felt less like a medical emergency and more like a strange, expensive hotel she hadn't booked. There were flowers she hadn't asked for. There was a food tray with things on it that were not hospital food. Someone had brought a cashmere blanket. She had not asked about any of it because she had a feeling she already knew the answer. He knocked, which surprised her. She had the impression, somehow, that Julian Fontaine was not the kind of man who knocked. "Miss Marsh," he said. He was dressed in a dark suit. No tie. He looked like someone who had been awake for several days and was managing it through sheer discipline. "Mr. Fontaine," she said, because she had been told his name by then. He sat in the chair her mother had used the day before, her mother, who had cried for 40 minutes, and then demanded to know everything about the man whose name was on the private room, and who had left with more questions than answers, and a cashmere blanket she'd been told to keep. Julian Fontaine did not cry. He sat with his elbows on his knees and he looked at her the way she imagined. He looked at problems he was trying to understand. "You saved her life," he said. "I don't know that for certain," Lily said. "Maybe the bullet would have missed. It wouldn't have." She believed him. He said it the way people say things when they've already had that conversation with themselves many times over. "How is she?" Lily asked. "Stubborn and impossible and currently reorganizing my kitchen." A pause. "She's well, because of you." Lily looked at her hands, folded on top of the cashmere blanket. Her right side ached in a deep structural way, like something inside had been rearranged and hadn't quite settled yet. "The security team," she said carefully. Julian's jaw moved. "What about them?" "The two at the door. One of them was on his phone, the other one, I think he was talking to someone, I don't know. Neither of them saw those men coming." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. "They won't be a concern," Julian said, "to anyone." She didn't ask him to clarify. She had a feeling she understood. "My brother wants to send you something," she said, changing the subject with the abruptness of someone who has decided not to go further down a road. "He's 16. He wanted to send you a Starbucks gift card. I told him that might be weird." Julian Fontaine looked at her. For the first time, something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but the outline of one, the suggestion of a face that knew what smiling felt like. "Tell him I prefer black coffee," Julian said. "No gift card necessary." She was in the hospital for 17 days. Julian came back on day 7, and day 10, and day 14. He didn't stay long, an hour, maybe less, and he didn't say much, and he asked questions about things she hadn't expected, what she was studying, how long she'd been at Cassini's, what Tyler was like in school, whether she'd ever been to the lake in winter. She answered because there was nothing else to do, and because talking to him was not what she'd expected it to be. He listened like listening was something he took seriously. He didn't interrupt. When she said something that surprised him, he didn't pretend it hadn't. On day 10, she asked him directly, "Why do you keep coming back?" He looked at her for a moment. "I'm not certain yet," he said. She thought that was probably the most honest thing he'd said to her. On day 14, Greta Fontaine came with him. The two of them filled the room differently. Greta immediately pulling the chair closer and launching into a story about a neighbor's dog. Julian standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, watching his mother talk, watching Lily listen. There was something in his face that Lily caught once, just a flash of it, before he looked away, a kind of relief so deep it had gone quiet. The thing about Julian Fontaine that nobody talked about, the thing that didn't fit the stories she would later hear about him, was that he loved his mother with a simplicity that had nothing to do with power or strategy or any of the things people associated with his name. It was just love, ordinary and complete, and he had almost lost her on a Thursday evening in a restaurant where she had been laughing at something funny, and a 22-year-old server had crossed 6 feet of hardwood floor for no reason she could fully articulate, and that was the only reason Greta Fontaine was currently critiquing the hospital's flower arrangement. Lily watched him watching Greta, and she understood something about him that she suspected very few people ever got close enough to see. She went home on a Thursday, 17 days after she'd arrived. Julian sent a car. She hadn't asked for one. It showed up at 10 a.m. with a driver who introduced himself as Felix and who handled her bag like it might break and who already knew her address, which she had not given anyone. Tyler was waiting at the apartment. He had cleaned. The cereal bowl was in the cabinet. She stood in the doorway of her own kitchen and felt something large and unsteady move through her, and she leaned against the door frame for a long moment with her hand pressed against her right side. "You okay?" Tyler said. "Yeah," she said. "Give me a second?" She took her second. Then she went inside. 3 weeks later, a man she didn't know came to her door at 9 in the morning with a sealed envelope and the information that Mr. Fontaine would like to see her at her convenience. And that convenience was entirely her choice, and he was sorry to bother her. And he left before she could ask a single question. She opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, 4 lines, in handwriting that was precise and slightly cramped. The handwriting of someone who had learned to write carefully and had never unlearned it. "Miss Marsh, I would like to speak with you about something that requires more than a hospital room, if you're willing. If you're not, I understand completely, and the car outside will take you anywhere you'd like to go instead." JF, she looked out her window. There was a black car parked on the street below. She texted Tyler, "Going out. Back by dinner. There's money on the counter for pizza." He texted back a thumbs up and then, 30 seconds later, "Be safe, please." She put on her coat. The address was a townhouse in the Gold Coast that looked like it was trying not to be noticed, which, she was learning, was a thing Julian Fontaine was very deliberate about. Felix let her in. Greta met her in the foyer, wearing an apron which Lily had not expected. "He's in the study," Greta said, and then quietly squeezing Lily's hand, "Thank you for coming." The study was a room that had clearly been lived in, books with broken spines, a desk with actual papers on it, a window overlooking a courtyard where bare November trees stood in a row like they were waiting for something. Julian was standing when she walked in, which also she hadn't expected. "Thank you for coming," he said. The same words as Greta, but he said them differently. "You said it wasn't an obligation," Lily said. "It isn't. I meant the thanks genuinely." She sat. He sat across from her, not behind the desk but in the chair but beside it, which felt deliberate. "I want to make sure you're protected," he said. "Going forward, the men who came into Cassini's were connected to a family in Detroit who believe they have a grievance with me. That grievance will be resolved. It's already being resolved. But until it is, and possibly after, you are someone who could be used as leverage against me." He paused. "That's not something I'm willing to allow. I'm not part of your world," Lily said. "You weren't," he said. "But you stepped into it. You didn't choose that. I'm aware of that. Which is why the decision about what happens next is yours, not mine." She looked at him. "What are you offering?" "Security. Housing, if you want it. For you and your brother. Resources for your schooling." A pause. "My word, for whatever that's worth to you. What does that cost me?" He looked like the question surprised him, or maybe like it didn't surprise him at all, but he hadn't been sure she would ask it. "Nothing," he said. "That's not a negotiation. You don't owe me anything. You owe me," she said. "That's the part you're not saying." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "That's the part I'm not saying." She sat with that for a moment. Outside in the courtyard, a pigeon landed on the arm of a stone bench and then immediately left again, apparently dissatisfied. "I'm going to finish nursing school," she said. "I don't want to stop that, I know. And Tyler has school here. He can't move, I know. And I have questions," she said, "about the men who came through that window, about who made the call and whether they've been dealt with, and I want an actual answer, not they won't be a concern." Julian looked at her for a long moment. "The man who ordered it was a man named Caruso in Detroit," he said. "He believed targeting my mother would send a message. He was wrong about what message it would send." He stopped. "He's been dealt with. The two men from the restaurant, one is dead. The other is in a situation he will not be leaving. And the guards," she said, "the ones at the door, removed from any position where they would be responsible for anyone's safety," he said. "Both of them." She looked at him steadily. "That's more honest than I expected. I'm trying," he said, which was also more honest than she had expected. She stood. He stood. "I'll think about the housing," she said. "The security, fine, I understand the logic. But I'm not going anywhere I don't choose to go. That's not something I would ever ask," he said. She picked up her bag. At the door of the study, she stopped and turned around, because there was one more thing and she wanted to ask it while she still had the nerve. "In the restaurant," she said, "when I was on the floor, who reached me first?" Julian's expression shifted in a way she couldn't entirely read. "I did," he said. She thought about that. She thought about hands pressing against her side, cold and urgent, and a voice that said, "Look at me," and the way it hadn't shaken. "Okay," she said. She went back out into the foyer, where Greta was waiting with a container of something that smelled like it had been cooking all morning. "For you and the boy," Greta said firmly, in a tone that did not suggest this was optional. Lily took the container. It was still warm. She thought about the dragonfly clip and the crossword puzzle in pen, and the woman sitting beside her bed in the dark of a morning she barely remembered. "Thank you," she said. Greta patted her hand once. "Come back," she said. "For dinner. Not as a transaction, just for dinner." Lily walked back out to the black car where Felix was waiting. She had 2 bullets worth of damage in her body that would take months to fully heal. She had a brother at home waiting for pizza money. She had nursing school applications sitting half-finished on her laptop, and a shift at Cassini's she had not yet decided whether to return to, and a life that had, in the space of 90 seconds on a Thursday night, taken a turn she was only beginning to understand. She got in the car. The city moved past the windows, gray and enormous and entirely indifferent. She thought about what Julian Fontaine had said, about protection and obligation, and the word nothing said by a man who had spent his whole life in a world where nothing was ever actually nothing. She thought about his hands shaking, she thought. Well, she looked out the window at the lake, which appeared between 2 buildings for just a moment. Flat and cold and so wide you couldn't see where it ended, she thought. Okay then, let's see. Wherever this road was taking her, she had already walked the hardest part of it. She had walked it in 6 steps across a restaurant floor, without thinking, without calculating, without asking whether it was worth it. And she was still here. That had to count for something. If you've made it this far, I think you know what kind of story this is. The kind where the smallest act of courage in the darkest moment becomes the thing that changes everything. If that hit you somewhere real, hit that like button. Subscribe to Ava's Romance Library for a new story every week. And tell me down in the comments, what would you have done in Lily's shoes? Would you have moved? I want to know. I'll see you in the next one.